I'm really excited to kick off our third year of the Racial Equity and Social Impact panels and conversations. This series is sponsored by Berkshire Bank. We would like to thank them for their leadership and stepping up and representing their commitment to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion by supporting the work, but also supporting the experts that we're able to bring into our community because of the work. The topic that we're going to cover today are men of color and the intersection of culture, authenticity, and the workplace. Um, we have about um, three dynamic individuals that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. But Keontae Coleman, Ryan Williams, and Jeremy Morris, who are representing different industries, different geographic locations, but are all showing up here today, ready to engage us in a conversation on what it means to show up in workspaces and places as men of color. From a historical and maybe even contemporary standpoint, and what are some of the challenges associated with that? And our goal is to hopefully help us as a community think about what this means as we here in Central New York are having ongoing conversations about being a more inclusive, working towards being a more profitable region, and how diversity and the retention and attraction of diverse talent is central and integral to our growth and our sustainability. And so hopefully their experiences and conversation today will help us think about some things more critically. I said it once, but I'll say it again. We would like to thank Berkshire Bank. They are our sponsors for this series. At the end of today, we'll send out dates for our subsequent episodes that we have coming up in March as well as April. For those that may not know me, my name is Dr. Johanna Rogers. I'm the Senior Vice President for Racial Equity and Social Impact here at Center State CEO. Many of your faces are familiar. Hopefully we've connected with your companies or worked with some of your colleagues already, but we're excited to have you here today. The work that I've done over the last probably 15 years has centered on what diversity, equity, and inclusion means across different sectors. And I'm happy to be leading the work that we're doing here at Center State and thinking about how equity plays a part in growing a more prosperous region. Part of the reason we wanted to talk about the men of color experience in the workplace is that because over the last 3 years, when we all have taken a look at what DEI truly means, a lot of the conversations have come up on the heels of incidents or events that have centered around engagement with Black men. But also, in addition to that, research in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion has always talked about the representation or lack thereof, or the unique experiences of individuals at the intersections of race and gender. And oftentimes in March, we'll have a panel dealing with race and gender from a woman's perspective. But I said we aren't creating many spaces where we are putting Black men or men of color in a position to talk about workspaces, opportunities, community, and what that means, right? Unless it's kind of depicted on the national news as an unfortunate incident. And so I wanted to make sure we kicked off the series this year after a lot of planning with some male voices to talk about what this means to them, what has been supportive to them, and what challenges still exist, and how we can think about representation in the diverse experiences of diverse people within the workplace. I had the fortune of talking with the panelists earlier this week, last week as well. And one of the things that was brought up is that, We talk about diversity and recognizing that there are different um, groups of people, there are different racial, ethnic, cultural identifiers that we consider all the time. But when it comes to thinking about the Black male, they wanted to make sure we also were talking about the diversity of experiences within that population. And so I'm quite sure they'll speak more to that. Um, but I thought that was really, really a profound point in thinking about it from those that are working from a professional perspective, but also working from the blue collar or very entry level perspective, because the thing that we need to think about as a business and leadership community is how do we design, create spaces, develop strategies to address the spectrum of needs from each of these populations, right? And so our panelists today, I'm quite sure will speak from different points that you can take they will speak from key points that you could take some advice from for sure. When we also started to think about what does it mean to be a Black male or a man of color in workspaces specifically, what are some key findings around this population that shows up as challenges or barriers or interrupters to them being successful or showing up authentically? And a lot of the data talks about early experiences in the workplace can really impact their trajectory. Oftentimes, they're meeting discrimination or microaggressions or outright racist behaviors early on in their life, which often challenges their ideas about where it is they see themselves going. Um, the pay and equity gap, still specifically Black men are paid 71 cents to the dollar and compared to their white colleagues, or white male colleagues specifically. Um, and even William Smith writes a lot about this as a scholar, but we are often taught that the more advanced we become getting degrees and certificates, if you will, the more likely you are to get placed in gainful employment, become successful. And what research has found is that even men, Black males specifically, who are graduating, earning degrees, still are considerably underemployed compared to their white counterparts. And so we just wanted to throw some of these statistic ideas out there as we begin to today's conversation, because when we talk about what matters and when we talk about diverse experiences of all people, we can't necessarily forget the intersections of our reality and that reality of men of color in the community and what that might mean as they're showing up in the workspaces, right? Showing up with credentials and in leadership positions, and how that may be impacted by other community members, right? And so I am going to stop there and just briefly introduce our panelists, right? So that outside from hearing my voice, you can really get into conversations with them. Up first, we have Keontae Coleman. He teaches broadcast journalism, DEI, and media and sports. He earned his PhD in higher education administration from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And we can find Dr. Coleman up at Syracuse University. He's new to the community, but he is not new to this work and has been doing a lot around supporting diverse students, creating research that talks about the diverse representation of folks of color in media. We have Ryan Williams with us today. He's the Director of Operations for Good Life Foundation, but also a lead consultant for Raw Consulting. Ryan currently serves as the Director of Operations at Good Life, a nonprofit working to disrupt youth violence, poverty, and incarceration through entrepreneurship and hip hop culture. I had the fortune of facilitating a workshop as a part of Ryan's work a few weeks ago. He's really dynamic, and he holds certificates in strategic planning, nonprofit life cycles, physical fitness, and project management with additional experience in community development. So welcome, Ryan. We look forward to hearing thoughts from you. And last but certainly not least, there's Jeremy Morris. He's a senior counsel with a focus on white collar litigation at Taft Law, which is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. He's active in his community with a special interest in the development of young minds in the city's future. Jeremy is chairman of the board for the Avada Dance Company. He's a part of a number of initiatives and is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you, Jeremy, Ryan, as well as Keontae for joining us. We are gonna give each of our panelists about 5 to 7 minutes or so to just talk about what this topic means to them. And then we're gonna come back with a couple of moderated questions. And so going in order of introduction, Keontae, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this panel. I am a fan of being able to share information in this space. Part of doing this type of work, you should always strive to situate yourself for the audience at the beginning so that they understand kind of who you are and where you're coming from. So when I situate myself for you all in this DEI space, I am a Mississippi bred country boy. I come from Tupelo, Mississippi, but a rural part of Tupelo. And my family lived on sharecrop land in a house that my grandfather owned, and it's passed down to my mom and her sisters. Lived in an extended household in his home, whereas my mom, her sisters, and my cousins and brothers and sisters and all of that, everyone worked in a factory. So Tupelo, Mississippi has a lot of furniture factories in it. So pretty much everybody works in a factory around there. But I lived in a Black community, went to the Black church right down the road, but my K through 12 experience was a predominantly white K through 12. So my community where I went to church, ran around and played, mostly Black, go to school, and usually my classes would be probably 80% white, something like that. So that was my K through 12 experience. Went to Jackson State University, which is a historically Black college, historically Black university for my undergrad. Did journalism there, was driven to do journalism because I grew up in a family that watched the news religiously, watched it religiously, woke up to it, went to sleep to it. Over the summers, people were watching it at noon, like depending on their work shift and those kinds of things. And one thing always stood out in my head was whenever there was a crime story and the reporters did not give the race or identification of the person, my family always said, oh, it must be a white person. Because the Black people always had a mugshot. And that, for whatever reason, that rung in my head. So I pursued something where I could hopefully start to change that. And in the newsrooms that I worked in, once I got out of Newhouse, I tried to help with making sure we were doing more holistic coverage, making sure that we were putting stories in more context and getting away from as much of the mugshot type of coverage as possible, because just because someone is arrested doesn't mean they're convicted. And if they're not convicted, we don't circle back around and say, hey, everybody, that person, they didn't get convicted of that crime. So you can take that out of your mind and what you judge them on and stop them from getting that job or whatever the case may be. I stumbled into teaching, and I've loved it. I started teaching at a historically Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina, at Bennett College, and also taught part-time at North Carolina A&T, another HBCU. While doing that, I pursued my PhD in higher ed administration because I had two communications degrees already. And I wanted to do, I'm a leader. I've always pursued leadership paths in whatever I was in. So I started doing leadership at Bennett College, was the chair of the department, took over assessment and things like that, and eventually was the dean there of our professional studies program. And since I've gotten here I was at Middle Tennessee State after leaving Bennett College in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville. So that's a PWI, but it's more of a commuter type college. And now I'm here at Syracuse, which has a very different population than what MTSU had, and a very different population than what A&T and Bennett College had. So I've been blessed to move around into several spaces and be able to navigate those spaces and take on leadership roles. I just started here in the fall, and in January, I accepted a position to lead our assessment within Newhouse. And in doing so, I've already noticed a couple of things that I've had to point out, to where the university and Newhouse has been real big about diving into the DEIA space. And one of the first tasks that I had was doing program review for a couple of our programs. And the form had absolutely nothing on it about DEI, measuring it, what have we done, how have we captured it, any type of metrics, information for a program review. So I raised my hand to the university about, hey, if this is something we want, we need to start capturing that data. I'll kind of stop right there and allow my fellow panelists to pick up.
Thank you, Keontae. I'm going to follow back up on that point later about evaluating the program document that you mentioned. But Ryan, why don't you go ahead and let us hear a little bit from you?
Sure. Keontae, thank you for sharing your experience. And good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be able to be welcomed into this space and have the opportunity to share with you. To provide some context, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I came to Syracuse in 2013 for Syracuse University. Growing up, I grew up in an inner city in a one-parent household, but with a mother who was very involved and it was a Caribbean household. So if anyone's familiar, it was pretty strict, but out of that came a lot of opportunities and access. For me, that looked like getting access to spaces that many of my peers at that time did not have access to. So around the age of 13, 14, I got into a program called Prep for Prep, which offered me a full scholarship to a preparatory boarding school in Kent, Connecticut, which was my first time being immersed in a space that really did not look anything like my own. It was predominantly a white institution, but I got to try a lot of different things I've never tried before, like crew, squash, and a curricula that was really foreign to me coming from the inner city. It was at the Kent School during my senior year that I really developed the passion to explore some of these inequities in my community. At first, that started as exploring health disparities. When I went to Syracuse University in 2013, I was studying food studies and public health because my senior year, I had to do a thesis in high school in which I discovered that, the top three killers at the time, I think this is still true in America, being heart disease, cancer, and high blood pressure were all related to lifestyle and diet and how that disproportionately affected people in my community. So that was kind of the introduction for me to really explore the disparities in my own community. At Syracuse University, I actually, after about 3 years, went to the United States Marine Corps through a program that I was a part of. And I served as a scout and rifleman in the Marine Corps for 4 or 5 years. And upon leaving the Marine Corps, I came back and went back to Syracuse part-time and started my own business on SU's campus. Now, the reason why I share that with you guys is because though I came from the inner city, I also was able, like Keontae, to have an opportunity to kind of live in both worlds and develop the skill sets necessary to navigate both worlds. And, you know, it really instilled in me how so many people from my background do not have the same accessibility or opportunity that I've had. And that's really what started my work in Syracuse community with the Good Life Youth Foundation, where we predominantly work with at-risk youth in the judicial system, the education system, and the community, ages 13 to 24. And we utilize hip hop and entrepreneurship to disrupt cycles of poverty, incarceration, and violence. And from that work, I also developed my consulting firm, Raw Consulting, where predominantly I work with nonprofits, secondary education, local government, and startups, and thinking about ways we can build capacity and support these organizations through strategy, systems, and resources that's inclusive and equitable for all. You know, and I want to dive into just 2 key things that really stand out for me in my own personal experiences as someone who's still young and growing as a business leader. And, you know, I'm going to explore these further in the conversation. But the first thing is creating spaces for intentional and active communication. I would say that a recurring theme for me throughout my professional career has been going into spaces that appear to value equity and inclusion, but once you become a part of the culture, the conversation stops, right? For me, that may look like not understanding certain cultural norms, or when I didn't do a task, especially earlier on in my career, it was attributed to certain assumptions being held by a supervisor or peer. And on the reverse side, also challenging myself when I went into these spaces with what assumptions I held about the spaces I went into, right? So that's something I want to explore in this conversation is how do we create these spaces for inclusive and intentional dialogue in which, you know, there's both an active listener and communicator. And another key theme for me is how do we work with organizations to acknowledge and embrace individuality on a daily basis, right? Not just in a marketing campaign. And why that's so significant for me, from the military to education, I've been in so many situations where my likeness has been used for a campaign to showcase diversity. But then I'm told the very next day that my locks look better up because when they're down, they're in my face, right? And that's just an example. Or having some image of my likeness, whether it's earrings or something else, blotched out of a picture in a marketing campaign, but being told that I'm valued in this organization. So those are kind of the 2 key themes that I look forward to exploring in this conversation.
Thank you, Ryan. You and Keontae have me like jotting down thoughts and ideas to follow back up on. So thank you for those points. Jeremy.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Morris. I am senior counsel here at Taft Law. Our full name is Taft, Titinius and Hollister, but we go by Taft Law. I am a white collar litigator. So what that means is I assist clients and corporations with, you know, complex issues that could just be general litigation matters. It could be individuals who are impacted by financial situations, or they in those particular situations. So that's, you know, white collar crime is really looking at non-criminal matters that typically advance to either federal court or state court matters. Why that matters is because I landed here because I was a former federal prosecutor for the Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana. And I was also a state court prosecutor in Atlanta, Georgia, Fulton County. So I was an assistant district attorney there. My career path wasn't always a lawyer. I first started out in higher education. So I have a passion for the connection between, college life and then the career. But even further in that, just to make a couple updates to my bio, and that was, my delay in providing that. So with Ibotta Dance Company, I was the former chair and no longer in that role with Ibotta, but Ibotta Dance Company is a organization that really focuses on bringing the arts into Indianapolis for children who otherwise may not have access to it. So it's an equity issue. So that's why I was involved with Ibotta. Now I'm involved with Bright Lane Learning, which is an organization here in Indianapolis. So I'm in Indianapolis, by the way, but Bright Lane Learning, and this is important. The reason why I bring these organizations up because Bright Lane Learning is an organization that focuses on children who are experiencing homelessness. And across the United States, particularly here in Indianapolis, homelessness directly impacts folks of color, and specifically Black and Brown children. And I'm involved in that because it's important, because a lot of times in these spaces of leadership, you don't have many Black males that are in those spaces, just kind of serving as tutors or even in the leadership and being on the board of directors for that. So I was in that space. I'm also a trustee for Indiana University. For the state of Indiana, we have 9 campuses across the state. There are 9 trustees, and out of that 9 trustees, I am one of those sitting trustees that manages and governs for the entire university system. So I lay that background just to kind of flip back to my time in a couple different spaces, and I'll lay them out specifically. Before I go forward, as an attorney, I must always do my due diligence as an attorney for my firm and also as a trustee. My opinions that are stated in this conversation are those of my own. They do not represent my employer. They do not represent Indiana University. So I must also give you that disclaimer. With that said, I can freely talk. So going back, I want to take everybody back to May 2020. This experience in this moment that was taking place, the murder of George Floyd, taking you back to that moment, I was a federal prosecutor, silenced as a federal prosecutor. There were things that working for the Department of Justice that you can and cannot do. And as a federal prosecutor at the time, there are things that we cannot do. We not be part of different protests, anything that looks like it could potentially give rise, and even if it isn't, that could potentially give rise to being acts against the government. You can't go against yourself, right? So anything that puts you in the potential space of looking like that is actually somewhat of a conflict. So imagine, across the Department of Justice, hundreds and Black lawyers trying to figure out where they could add a voice and not be able to say anything because, there are things that we can't speak out politically. There are laws on the books related to these matters. So you're silenced. And the reason why I want to go there, because it made me feel like these past moments in my careers where you are silenced and can't say anything, but it was the job. I chose this job, right? And I absolutely loved my experience as being a federal prosecutor. But I want to bring back that moment because it was also a moment of reflection and how the world looked at what diversity looked like. Because I think everybody kind of checked the box on diversity. That was like the buzzword from especially 2000 to 2010. And then we moved into sort of this equity space. It's like, oh, we need to talk about equity. All right, and how do we focus on, make it an equitable space? And then it's like, okay, well, I think we're doing that, but we need to be a little bit more inclusive. It's like we're inviting everybody in, we're making these spaces dynamic, but at the same time, like, how are we offering opportunities and how are we giving voices of value? Well, I felt that it was a great time that it allowed the world to awaken to a conversation. But sadly enough, before I say that, you did see corporations, you saw probably your own companies making changes and promises and commitments to advancing the workplace, to really making it a more equitable space, making it a more inclusive space where people belonged, right? It's February 2023. I had most of that conversation that I have seen is dwindled off. And the reason why it's dwindled off is because it was buzzword, it was catchy, it was important. But during that time period, particularly as a Black male and as a prosecutor, as a person that could have been in that same scenario, and oftentimes as Black men, no matter how many degrees that we have or how much education that we have, we can sometimes find ourselves in any situation, doesn't matter what we have. We can have on a suit. You can go back to, what was the movie? Crash. I can take you back to Crash. You can come all the way forward to movies now. It does not matter what you have on. It does not matter what you have. It is the experiences that are still impacted by us. And so my conversation is really focusing on what everybody else is accountable in this space that we live. And I speak from a perspective because sometimes I get tired of being the voice that's trying to be in the room to educate others and bring others up. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I told my colleagues to go read something, go study. I don't have to tell you this. You're too smart. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not feeding you. You can find out things. You can go research. You can look up books. You can come. But in generally, I wanted to also make sure that my space was open for others to come to me, to speak to me. And I wasn't like, hey, go Google something and then like come back to me. No, but oftentimes a lot of the questions in 2020 were, well, what can I do? Well, how can I be better? And those were the best questions because they opened up a conversation. And I think this platform is really kind of highlighting, opening up this conversation. But I really want to make this point to bring us back to this desire to move us forward and not just talk, but action. And I think from this panel discussion, you should leave with thoughts on how I can be a better colleague, how I can show up better, how I can be of support. And my last point that I'll leave on is oftentimes as a Black male, we're not in the room. We're not in the room when those discussions are taking place related to how you are being experienced in the workplace. And it's oftentimes those who are not of color that are in the rooms. And being silent in the room is damaging for sometimes being an advocate for someone, not saying something when a word could assist and help them. And so I just kind of really want to take my position, and I'll get into other pieces of my background, but really look at tangible things that everyone in this panel discussion can really leave with. I'm a toolkit kind of guy. So when you come to something, what can I what things of value can I take with me? And so that these are this is what my set of the conversation is going to center around.
Thank you, Jeremy. Ryan, Keontae, I'm not gonna stop the momentum at all. And so, as I listened to you, I put some thoughts, in the chat, and I wanna encourage, our participants as well. If you're starting to have questions or something really speaks to you, feel free to drop a question in the chat. If you really feel empowered and want to, add your voice to the space, we will call out on folks that have questions. But my first question for our panelists, kind of essential on this, I often get the question of, Johanna, do you know any, we're looking for talented individuals and we can't seem to find talent, right? That question always kind of takes me back because I'm like, I have a whole lot of friends that are very, very talented. I'm quite sure, like, what do you mean you can't find talent? And as I'm sitting here listening to you and you all were introducing yourselves and the things that you've done, I'm like, you're representing various industries, have depths of experiences. What do you often, or what would you say for folks who are looking to attract candidates of your caliber, or maybe even not at your caliber yet, and say that they're struggling to find, maybe male talent or individuals that are representative of a male identity that to add to their diversity? What are some of the thoughts that you would share back with those folks, Keontae?
For me, I would say you want to be as attractive to, you want to be attractive to any candidate that you desire to get into your company. And you want to understand the environment that you created. And if you don't know what that is, that's problem number one. So if you bring me into your business, I'm probably going to see you. You may bring me into your business and cherry pick who I talk to,
Mhm.
but I'm going to seek out the janitorial staff. I'm going to seek out individuals that you may not put on the list, so I can slide to the side and ask them, what do you think about this company? How are you treated in this space? Because more times than not, those people are going to look like me. And the spaces where I'm going, I can look on the website and find the person that looks like me, and it's only going to be a handful, if that. So I can reach out to them by myself before I even make it to the location. I want to know what's going on inside of your company. So really think about for yourself, how will those people talk about your company and their experience going in and out of the locations? Because if they're not treated well, why would I think I'm going to be treated well? So make sure that you are painting a picture that's accurate. Ryan said something that grates on my nerves, that he was part of some of the campaigns showing the diversity and then being told X number of things. Like, the picture isn't enough. You have to have the systems in place that support everyone. Support everyone. One thing, as a professor, we get notes saying, hey, this student has filed a note for accommodations for your class. So that was something that I learned when I first started teaching. Well, this isn't even trying to be magnanimous or anything like that. Does it make sense for me to change what I'm doing just to have a set of things that I do for 20 people and then for one person, have them doing something completely different? Or should I be more inclusive and have everybody doing the same thing, being mindful that some people will need help in this way? So allowing that just from the beginning. So that one thing, I run my syllabus past our accommodation office. Hey, do you see any issues here? So when somebody pops up and says, hey, I'm already covered. You want to think about your DEI plans that way as well. It needs to take care of everybody, no matter what. That's kind of my thought there.
I think so. I think corporations, businesses, educational institutes, any business has to have intentionality. And part of this requires it not being the DEI, because what has happened over the past 20 years, it has become the role of the DEI office to implement these strategies. And oftentimes you have DEI that's not connected with recruitment, DEI that's not connected with HR, DEI that's not connected with hiring managers, partners, et cetera. They are sometimes just so removed to just serve as more of like an external function with internal implications, right? So external facing, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're promoting, this is what we're about, with internal implications, meaning maybe this is a place that's safe for me. And when a person, kind of going on what Keontae is saying, when a person gets to that space and they are interviewing, and they just so happen to walk out and may speak to somebody in, building services, and they're just kind of like, oh, about the, fifth Black person that has walked in and out of here, and they don't stay long. And when you hear things like that, you recognize that the external facing things aren't necessarily matching what's really happening, although there are internal implications that it exists. So I think a large part, it requires it to be DEI, B or J, JEDI, it's got a whole bunch of acronyms, but the whole point of it is for people to feel like, I always use this example, everybody, when you go to your grandmother's house or have ever been to somebody's grandmother's house, you're made to feel comfortable, this is the majority. I'm giving you, because somebody's grandma may, be the one to tell you no. But generally speaking, when you go to grandma's house, that's a place where even if you feel like home is unbalanced, grandma's house is always a place to make feel safe. And if we think about trying to create the workplace where people can be made to feel safe, it requires everybody, because grandma's the head of the house. I don't care if grandpa was there, grandmother was the head of the house. And grandmother made sure that everybody followed what should happen and didn't care if you didn't like it. This is your responsibility, and you treat each other with respect. Same thing, top-down leadership in organizations that have that mindset of, I'm creating a space where people can belong and just be, and it's everybody's role, not that one person. Well, you can assign one person to kind of say, hey, be my eyes and ears, assist me, help me learn things that I may not be hearing. But oftentimes I see the efforts lag or fail or go to the thoughts of, we can't find anybody. Well, you can't find anybody because you're not looking for them, or you aren't looking in spaces where the people that you want, you're not looking where they are. You can't keep going to a bar, or you can't keep going to a basketball game. So it's like, oh, where are all the golf players? Every time I go here, I don't find any golf players. That's because everybody's playing basketball. Go to the golf course, you'll find golf players. Go to where these spaces are. And it's not just like, oh, go to historically Black colleges and universities. You do recognize that, diversity is everywhere. And if you want it, go out and find it. And so I always throw the challenge back to say, what are you not doing? And how do you want to obtain it? And what are you willing to do to get it?
I think one of the things we've heard, and I'll let you respond, because Ryan, I think you brought up this question. Oftentimes, I think to what Jeremy is saying and what Keontae, blatantly said, it's about finding community. And I think, Ryan, you were the one that brought up at
Yeah,
first, we've had to go in and out of communities. We've had to live in, you said, navigate both worlds.
Mhm.
And so in the spirit of the question I originally asked, how do we find talent, but adding on to what Jeremy's added, how do they go, how do the attendees for today, when they think about maybe what they're not doing,
yeah,
how would you say they go into the world, our community, and start forging some of those relationships?
no, that's a great question. So in regards to attracting talent, right? Specifically entry-level junior management, I'm gonna just get real tactical here. Are we effectively utilizing community resources in this process? And what I mean by this is, at the Good Life Foundation, what we've been able to do is partner with for-profit industries to kind of source and vet talent and provide a training ground, right? And so I first task for-profit agencies to see how can we leverage or create strategic partnerships with local organizations that are already engaging and developing this group of youth to kind of create this pipeline of entry-level and junior management talent, right? What that also does is, one, it creates a feedback loop. One thing that we found was that in our first iteration of this process of job placement, it wasn't a complete success in terms of the numbers that were placed. However, it was a success in what we learned, right? And so we learned that there were quite a few assumptions being made by the hiring party, such as the individuals had transportation that would get them there on time, that they had the mail app downloaded on their phone so it can respond to mail in a timely fashion. And we were able to troubleshoot this in real time for the next cohort of individuals. And also to Jeremy's point, are we leveraging our neighboring universities and colleges, which are like really the powerhouse of talent? Right now, Good Life is around, we're going on, 33, 34 employees. But back when it was about 5 of us, we were able to, I was able to facilitate about 15 to 20 interns across 2 years that were predominantly of my background. And so they understood and had a connection to the mission and goals, but they also had the expertise, right? And it also honestly provided a cost savings to the organization because we were utilizing university talent, but also compensating them for their time, right? So I think the first thing is, are we effectively utilizing community resources? The second thing is exploring the prerequisites for entry-level and junior-level management positions. I know in the nonprofit sector, sometimes funding sources dictate that we have to have bachelor degrees to hire somebody, right? But especially for those entry-level positions, I think one of the most amazing things I've learned in my journey as a nonprofit leader is that there's so much value in experience. And actually, this past year, for the first time in our organization history, we had a youth that went from being in our cohort, meaning they had their own challenging background, we were developing them, to becoming a junior management individual. And that really came from the experience and passion they had with the support we provided via professional development. And I would say exploring again, what are the barriers that we may unknowingly be implementing, such as having to have a 3 or 4 years of experiences in management, or having to have a bachelor's degree. You'd be surprised how many of my fellow military individuals are coming out of leading people into war and can't find a job. And that's just, it's really sad. But I would say those 2 things, right? So are we effectively creating strategic partnerships in our community with organizations doing this work? And 2, how do we explore the prerequisites in our hiring practices, specifically for entry and junior level, to kind of create more accessibility?
Great points. I want to open it up. Otherwise, I'll put another question out there to our audience today. Anyone want to come off mute or put a question in the chat for either all three or one of our panelists? I think some of the things that Ryan, that you just mentioned was about thinking more intentionally about policy and practice, right? And I think this circles back to a couple of things that were mentioned. Jeremy talked about how policy and practice within his industry sector could potentially further silence specific demographics, particularly thinking back to May of 2020 with the killing of George Floyd, right? And as a man of color, his ability to say something or participate in some way potentially was limited. Keontae, you brought up the example very early on about how assessment tools or survey instruments think about experiences, but within the established document, there's no reference to diversity, right? As another example of a practice or perceived inclusive strategy that was still flawed. What are some of the ways or some of the other examples you might share with us that have impacted you as an individual, or some of the things that you have done to help other maybe men of color get involved or think about how they can speak back to or engage more deeply with organizations they've been a part of in an authentic way?
I think one of the, in working on my dissertation, I looked at journalism and mass communication leaders at large journalism programs. So deans and directors at programs like Newhouse around the country. And part of it was I surveyed everyone, but I also did a qualitative portion where I had some interviews with leaders of color. And I went down that path because I want to lead a program like this in the future. So this was basically my way of doing some intel for what I want to do. And the number of leaders talking about the challenges that they face, like being the head of some of the biggest programs in the country and being sabotaged by their administrative assistants, putting the wrong times for calendar dates into their for meetings, and them showing up 20, 30 minutes late for meetings where the president and other deans around the campus are waiting in the room. One being told by colleagues just blatantly that you don't belong here. Another speaking about going to a fundraising event where alums and things of that nature are there, and a donor treating this person like they're part of the wait staff. Like, yeah, can you get me another drink, as they're talking to that person's subordinate, like chairs and other faculty member, but that person was the only Black person in that bunch, and given a drink like, hey, go get me another one. Those types of demeaning acts for people who are honestly like at the top of their game. They've done all the research. They've stood in front of all the students. They've got to this point, and still being treated that way is so disheartening. It's so disheartening. And the common denominator that came back from each one of them was, I didn't feel like I could share it with anybody because it would have been worse. Yeah, HR has a reporting system, but how many people, how anonymous is that going to be if you're the only person of color on the campus in a role like that? You know, so we have to really think about our systems in place and how we are welcoming everyone and making sure that they feel a part of the process. Being in a leadership role, that's not the end all. Like everyone that shows up, there's a common phrase within uh, I'm going to say Black community, but I've heard it across other marginalized communities, that you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. That is a debilitating reality. If I challenged you to look around your leadership room and tell everybody in that room, I need you to do way more work, but you're not going to advance half as far as these couple of people over here. How many people are you going to have sitting on that board? They're going to be looking elsewhere. But that's kind of the expectation that's been built in because of all of these systematic issues that are in place. So we have to be able to look at this from again, I don't think it needs to be magnanimous. I'm way past that. If you want your company to thrive, if you want your company not to be on the news for making a misstep in this area, that area, or whatever the case, you have to have diverse perspectives throughout at every single level. And you get to decide what that is and how diverse that becomes. But the thing that I would strongly hope that you consider is, what is the negative to doing that versus the negative PR that happens when you're that company that makes the misstep and now you're doing all of this damage control, as opposed to training up your staff and really having a lot of things in place, metrics in place that talk about what do we have on these documents that are tied to your bonuses, that are tied to whatever the case may be. Because if you had a 50% downfall in your sales or whatever goals that you were going to, that you're striving to hit for the next quarter, you do a SWOT analysis, you go through and do this, and this, and say, what am I going to do to fix this? Why don't we do that same thing around these topics? Because if you do, you'll find that you will have a stronger workforce and be more inviting to people that maybe don't look like you.
Absolutely. We have a question in the chat that I think picks up where your comments there, Keontae, leaves off. Someone asked, and I'll maybe direct this to Jeremy, but maybe if each of you have one thing, just one thing you would say to this, I think that would be helpful. We heard some examples of, maybe thinking beyond, a bachelor's degree requirement. And we know that some industries can do that. We can look at work experience, but there's some maybe technical industries that aren't able to remove those requirements for whatever reasons. And so our question is for those that are mandated and required to have folks with bachelor's degrees and so forth, but maybe having some challenges recruiting or attracting talent, but it's happening. What are some of the things that they can do to support pipeline development? What are some of the things that they can do to help an individual break through those barriers or not work twice as hard to get half as far, or remove some of the barriers that kind of reinforce their only get half as far within those organizations? With Jeremy and then maybe Ryan, one example of something that you've seen done or you think folks could consider?
Well, I think we see it all the time. You see the new hire who doesn't have any of the qualifications as it is written. So, and they are, oftentimes they are not persons of color. And so we see the exceptions, right? Exceptions to the rules are made all the time, but they seem to be held in higher regard when there is a need to diversify in certain sectors. So, I mean, other than the obvious, right? Creating the pipeline and what does that look like? I mean, it goes back to what Ryan said earlier. It's the partnership, and businesses are only as strong as their communities. And I really do stand by that. You really are as strong as your community, because where you are does assist and inform how you are building that community and creating that pipeline. So if you aren't out in the community, if you don't have a presence, if you aren't having established relationships with many community organizations, those are your boots on the ground. They know where the people are. They know who has potential, and working with them, providing them grants and monies and dollars. I mean, because it's a win-win. It's that organization is winning because they're assisting and helping build their community. You're winning because you're helping build your pipeline. But it goes back to what I think is sort of like the baseline of it all: intentionality. You have to really want to. So my last piece of this is, once you do all of that, once you have built the pipeline and you provide them the resources, and you have individuals, you starting to diversify your workforce, you created opportunity. But once you've created opportunity, that's typically, like I said, where it drops off. And I'm sort of a person that once you create opportunity and allow them, you need to allow for mentorship, sponsorship, and development. Once they're in mentorship for somebody that they can rely on, this does not have to be somebody who looks like them. This is somebody who is providing them mentorship. We get mentorship from everyone. And sponsorship is that person that is in the room that is going to advocate for your development and your your movement within the organization or the structure, providing you the opportunities. And then the development is access so that you can become a better person, skill wise, learn it wise, in all of those areas. But often that can be sidetracked by the employee gone rogue. You all know that employee who has an issue with you and will find issues with every single thing that you do. And that employee that goes rogue is allowed to go rogue, and they are allowed to create and fester problems. Everyone knows it. And I've seen this so many times in companies or organizations, and that person ends up creating so much dysfunction that nobody is happy. So when you create the pipeline and you allow for opportunity to exist, and then you can establish effective mentorship, sponsorship, and development, don't allow your employees that go rogue to really offset the experiences, because that's why people leave. And if you look at it over the past couple of years, the tolerance level for most folks of color in these experiences and what is happening in the media and what is happening with law enforcement and continuing to see and experience trauma on a level that you see at home on your cell phone, and then to go to work and experience more trauma, folks will just leave. And that's the piece. So it's just kind of being aware of all of these pieces. And so, I know we are experiencing yet again more media coverage of police brutality and Tyre Nichols, and even talking on that, it does not matter that the officers were Black. And so there's a counter argument. Well, why are they upset? It's like it's so even that whole defense of having to explain and talk about those things create trauma. And so what I'm closing on is just looking at the intentionality and being very very intentional about who you are bringing into those conversations that is going to allow for that pipeline development.
If I can jump into Johanna, one, I want to echo what Jeremy just said about investing in professional development, but I also want to add, anytime I've worked with an organization in developing a strategic plan, and we get to like, what are your core competencies? What's your unique selling proposition? What makes you unique to the people you're trying to serve? It's always interesting where I see everyone in the room kind of bounce off ideas, and I'll allow for that to happen. And then I'll ask them, well, did we ask those that we're trying to serve? And what I mean by that is, internally, are we creating feedback loops for those that do enter our pipeline to let us know what is unsatisfactory for them, even when they depart, right? You'd be surprised how many employees, even that I've experienced, that when they are deciding to leave their position, they will have no problem letting you know the difficulties and challenges they faced. And that's a learning opportunity for us as an organization to see how can we improve in that for the next group of individuals that we do hire. One tactical example from secondary education, I was working, my team and I were working with a high school that was predominantly white, and they were seeing an influx of kids from the inner city. And we had teachers kind of saying, you know, these kids have these challenges, it's so hard to work with them because of X, Y, Z, because, you know, their parents are involved. And, you know, I asked them, like, well, have we spoken to those students? To which the room fell silent. And that led to us actually bringing in a social worker in the school, so they had the resource to facilitate discussions with the inner city kids who came to the schools, and gave them the opportunity to share out, how can you best help and serve me? So I think oftentimes we're looking outside of our organization for the answer, but we're hiring the people, they have the answer. And so can we create opportunities for them to share out? If not in-person interviews, most of us have virtual communities via Slack, Google Chats, etc. Are we creating deliberate channels maybe in a Slack? Are we creating deliberate channels in a Slack, for example, that will allow for people to communicate pain points that they've experienced so that we can improve them? So really establishing quality feedback loops from the top down and bottom up.
One of the things here as we bring this conversation to a close is all of your points have me just ruminating on a couple of things. And for those that are listening today, if you check the chat, our panelists have started to put some ideas in, but also some other thoughts that have come to mind have been dropped in there that you can hopefully take with you as reflective points. But I often say to the clients that we serve when we're working with organizations and thinking about their DEI strategies is, look at this community. And when you go out to dinner tonight with your families, or are taking a walk in the downtown area, I want you to look around. I want you to look at the pictures on the wall. I want you to look around the restaurant and see who's eating inside with you. How diverse are these establishments? And if you wanted to go to a space this evening and start fostering relationships with a Jeremy or a Ryan or a Keontae or the likes thereof, to help start really thinking about building stronger relationships with diverse audiences, or initiating some type of strategy that would help develop a pipeline for talent, where would you meet these individuals? Are they present in the locations that you frequent? Do you know the places in your community that are welcoming to them, right? Where are they located? Where do they exist? Or do they exist? And for those living here in Central New York, is something that I often talk about when we talk about attracting and retaining talent here. It's not just about the experience of the person within the company, but it's about what does the quality of life look like outside the company? And how are we as a business community thinking about engaging in the work that attracts them, but also retains them, and also keeps us in a space where we're continuing to build spaces. I think Ryan talked about that, Jeremy talked about that, Keontae, intentionally, right? Using the forethought of knowing, well, obviously we're not going to attract a large number of folks if outside of work, they don't see themselves reflected in our day-to-day community. And so how do we start to begin to foster those spaces or support the development of them in intentional ways, right? Because I think that's also something that's key for our own community to think about as we're listening to our panelists today talk about what really is important. I'm gonna ask, and I need to look at the chat, but if there closing thought from each of our panelists before we close out the session today, if there was one thing you wanted to just restate or put out there for folks to walk away with today, what would that be? And in a minute or less, let's start with Jeremy.
So I'll close with this. It makes me think about my mother and how I really hate this phrase, but I'm going to learn to love it. Resilient. It isn't because you want to. It's a matter of because you have to. And I really, being resilient is like, oh, they're so resilient. Look at all that they've done. How can we lessen this pathway to resiliency, right? Because that means there were barriers in the way. That means there were struggles put in their way because they overcame them and they were resilient in this journey. And I think we all have an opportunity to affect change in our daily lives and our daily roles. And oftentimes that comes with, as was said by my fellow panelists, in your own workspaces and in your own communities and in your own reach. And don't be silent, speak up. If you recognize something, say something. And don't be afraid to forge relationships across all the diversity areas, right? Because we didn't even get to the intersectionality of race, sexuality, gender. We didn't even really sort of like go into there, but that all impacts this as to where we're headed. So my final thoughts would be to not only challenge your own organizations to be intentional in their efforts with establishing effective DEI programs and initiatives, but also challenge and be intentional within yourself. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And this has been a wonderful talk. So thank you. I'll put my link in the chat group.
Thank you, Jeremy. Ryan, one thing.
Sure. If I can have one key takeaway, it would be to leave the office and go out into the community and kind of echo what Johanna was saying. I kind of dropped in the chat. I think for many of us trying to access talent in these communities, how are we actively contributing to these communities and looking for opportunities? Maybe it's joining a nonprofit board that's mission focused, but can benefit from your expertise, but also creates opportunities for you to access this pool of talent and learn about the communities you're trying to serve. We can't seek to hire and engage if we don't understand who we're trying to serve. And so my one takeaway would be just, especially if you're downtown here in Syracuse, step outside and walk down the block to Salt City Market or or comparable, and just engage this community in as many ways as possible.
Especially on a beautiful day like today in central New York in February. Keontae.
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to having more with those that would like to bring me in and talk to you and your staff or what have you. For me, the big thing is doing the work part. It has become such a ugly word. And I do something with my students where we talk about this. I talk about points of privilege, and understand that we all have variations of points of privilege. Me being able to sit in one of the top premier journalism programs in the country as a professor is a point of privilege. I get to go into locations and things now that I couldn't have as a professor at Bennett College, just because I have SU behind me on this virtual screen. That's a point of privilege. We all have to be able to recognize where our points of privilege allow us access to, and those blinders that they give us. I told my students this story once where I said, I'm scared. When I was in Tennessee, I lived in a golf course community, point of privilege. But I was always nervous, scared to take my trash out if I forgot. I'm the worst at taking my trash out because our garbage always came too early in the morning, so you couldn't forget. But at night, taking my trash out, I'm nervous. That's not a point of privilege, because my neighbors all around me can easily pull their trash can to the road, no thoughts or anything. But I'm a Black man living in a golf course community in the South. That's not a point of privilege to be going out late at night pulling the trash can to the road. I had a neighbor who just got a riding lawnmower and was like, hey, Keontae, you can go get the riding lawnmower out of here and use it anytime you want. No, I won't be doing that. Because I didn't want, in a gun carrying state, anybody to not know our relationship as me and this white neighbor, and the privilege that he just bestowed upon me, that I could just walk over to his shed and pull out his riding lawnmower. No, I didn't want to be the next victim of we shoot, kill, and ask questions later. So when I politely declined to him, I didn't go into all of those details, but that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Understand that you're bringing people into these places. Because you're not thinking it doesn't mean it doesn't exist for them. You have to have those conversations with your employees. You have to be able to break down some of these walls so that we understand why states like California is passing the Crown Act. And if you don't know about that, you can do a little research on it. You got to do the work. And if you do the work, you won't have a workplace that is inviting, that people want to stick around, because retention is big too. Like, nobody wants to keep paying to keep doing job searches and bringing people in. So if you do the work on the front end, you should be able to maintain and be the kind of place where folks are saying, hey, I want you to come work with me. They treat me well here. That's a badge of honor. That's a gold star that is worth way more than I'm sure you will spend in creating that culture. But I put my information in the chat box.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Morris, for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, your expertise. It was very insightful. hopefully you all have found the experience, as we get thank yous in the chat, as inspiring, challenging, but also motivating. To not just sit and get, as one of my former mentors used to say, but it's challenge you to think about the action aspect of DEI, because it certainly had me thinking more about it today. So we want to thank you for your time, for the work that you're doing, and your willingness to come and speak with us today. For those of us that are here in Central New York, please reach out to myself or a member of our team here at Center State if you're interested in engaging more. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.